Pembroke Lodge sits on the highest point in Richmond Park and has the park's best view. The house began as a molecatcher's cottage, and in 1788 John Soane designed a Georgian mansion for the Countess of Pembroke. The garden survives from the 19th century and has four main sections: a woodland garden, a flower garden near the lodge, the modern Belvedere Terrace with an expansive view of London, and a charmingly flowery cottage garden beside a cottage ornee. Instead of describing these areas myself, I'll show some video of Richmond Park and of the garden while reading accounts of them by the daughter and grandson of Britain's greatest reforming Prime Minister, Lord John Russell, who lived here from 1847 until his death in 1878. But before them, here's a short clip from a 1952 interview with Bertrand Russell, which has a special appeal to me. I supported his campaign for nuclear disarmament in my teens, and my interest in philosophy came from his books. But I'm showing the clip to give a taste of what life in Pembroke Lodge was like in the late 19th century.
The world is altogether so different from what it was when I was young. It was thought that there was going to be ordered progress throughout the world. Gradually, every country was going to take to parliament. There was going to be a bicameral legislature and two parties, and it was all going to be exactly like England everywhere, all over the world. My grandmother used to laugh because one time she said to the Russian ambassador, "Perhaps someday you will have a parliament in Russia." And he said, "God forbid, my dear Lady Russell." Except for the first word, the Russian ambassador at the present day might give the same answer. But that was the assumption. It was all going to be orderly, all quite nice. The atmosphere, apart from politics, was one of Puritan piety. Very great piety, very great austerity. We always had family prayers at 8. And before family prayers, I had to do half an hour's practice at the piano, which I hated. Although there were 8 servants in the house, the food was always of the utmost simplicity. And even of what there was, if there was anything at all nice, I wasn't allowed to have it, because it wasn't good for children to eat nice things. For instance, there would be rice pudding and apple tart. Grown-ups had the apple tart, and I had the rice pudding. And there was extreme austerity in all those ways. My grandmother, until she was over 70, would never sit in an armchair until after dinner. Never. It's almost gone out, that sort of austere living by well-to-do people, which in those days was very common.
Bertrand's aunt, Lady Mary Agatha Russell, wrote of Pembroke Lodge in the mid-19th century. It was approached by a drive between ancient oaks, limes and evergreens, and at the entrance was a 2-roomed thatched cottage, long occupied by a hearty old couple employed on the place. So careful and watchful that an amusing incident occurred one day when our father and mother were away from home. A lady and gentleman who were walking in the park called at the lodge and asked for permission to walk through the grounds. The old lodge-keeper refused, saying she could not give access to strangers during the absence of the family. The lady then told her that they were friends of Lord and Lady John. But still the old guardian of the place remained suspicious and obdurate, till, to her surprise and discomfiture, it came out that the visitors to whom she had so sturdily refused admission were no other than Queen Victoria and Prince Albert walking incognito in the park. Bertrand Russell, when a famous mathematician, philosopher and public intellectual, wrote in his autobiography that Pembroke Lodge had 11 acres of garden, mostly allowed to run wild. The garden played a very large part in my life up to the age of 18. To the west was an enormous view extending from the Epsom Downs, which I believe to be the Upson Downs, to Windsor Castle, with Hindhead and Leith Hill between. And I have never since been able to live happily without both. There were many fine trees, oaks, beeches, horse and Spanish chestnuts, and lime trees, a very beautiful cedar tree, cryptomerias, and deodars presented by Indian princes. There were summer houses, sweet briar hedges, thickets of laurel, and all kinds of secret places in which it was possible to hide from grown-up people so successfully that there was not the slightest fear of discovery. There were several flower gardens and box hedges. Throughout the years during which I lived at Pembroke Lodge, the garden was growing gradually more neglected. Big trees fell, shrubs grew over the paths. The grass on the lawns became long and rank, and the box hedges grew almost into trees. The garden seemed to remember the days of its former splendour, when foreign ambassadors paced its lawns, and princes admired its trim beds of flowers. It lived in the past, and I lived in the past with it. Now, here's another quotation about a small hillock which predates the Pembroke Lodge garden. This account is from 1884 and, though often repeated, is probably apocryphal. The grounds of Pembroke Lodge, which almost adjoin the new terrace, are tastefully and skilfully laid out in such a way as to appear more extensive than they really are. Forming part of the pleasure grounds is a little artificial hill known as King Henry VIII's Mount, on which it is said that monarch stood to see the signal gun fired from the Tower of London which announced the execution of Anne Boleyn, his wife. Whether true or false, the mount exists, and the view is protected by the Mayor's London plan. And quite right, too.